Hi, my name is Kevin Shelley. I'm with SER402, group number 3 for our capstone, and this is my midterm oral report. For it, we had the field day wildlife database application. One of the main problems was the AWS account in general. So AWS is not covered within the standard SER curriculum, and so it presented kind of a challenge in that aspect. The application itself is set up, both the front and the back end web server are both set up on AWS serverless within an S3 bucket. The main problem that we encountered initially was that there was no supporting documentation. There was a brief outline on how to configure the account, but no specific images or a step-by-step instruction on how to upload it. And the current documentation was very, very specific. It was a very specific use case, and the team, we had to pull and sift through the individual components of the document in order to understand what we were uploading. Um, the second major problem with it was ASU UTO actually owned the AWS account, so our application was hosted alongside a few others. And since it was managed by ASU UTO, we had very restricted access. The previous group had to send their source code up to the UTO representative. The UTO representative would then deploy it herself. Third point, as I mentioned earlier, none of our capstone members are very familiar with AWS. AWS or any cloud hosting service in general isn't as part of the software engineering curriculum, and transitioning AWS to the capstone team kind of pose risks of no one understanding the account and therefore risk breaking the project. We kind of solved this by creating the supporting documentation. We created documentation on how to deploy the application to AWS and add administrators to the account, and we are going to create more supporting documentation for that along the way. We transitioned the account to our current sponsor, so away from UTO and to our current sponsor who has direct impact over this project. And that means that the sponsor now has control of whoever has access to the account, including students, and so she can add students. Um, she can add new capstone groups as they come onto the project and remove the old ones so that we have a continuous flow of people who have access to the account. In order to set this up, we had a workshop with the UTO representative to set up the account. So she transitioned it from UTO over to our account, and walked us through step by step, helped us create some documentation, and then we used the videos that we recorded to create that supporting documentation. The results kind of speak for themselves. There's less dependency on the previous capstone group to learn the system. So that means once one team is done and has the document, they can then pass it on to the next, and the next group can use that supporting documentation in order to uphold the account rather than having to rely on the previous group. And that really allows for continuation because that previous group is not always going to be around for that kind of support. The next point, sponsor and capstone teams now have direct access to the account, which means I myself and my team can go on there and we can make changes. We can transition members in and out of it, and we can update the account. It's very specific to our application and doesn't have any other UTO resources or applications that are sensitive, and that we don't have to worry about all those fine details. And then with the supporting documentation, the tutorial, our team has set up the next team for more success ongoing. So with that right documentation, the teams can focus less on learning AWS and more time creating the features that they need to within the application, and then use the documentation to then upload to AWS. We don't want people focusing too much on AWS. We want people focusing on, kind of creating the cool ideas that they have for the application. In retrospect, what we would do is we would probably start this from the get-go. It's kind of the overall arching theme here. We'd start configuring the document and documenting AWS configuration from the get-go. So there was a period at the beginning of our capstone where it was kind of slow. We didn't have any sprints going on, and as time went on, we were more and more dependent on this UTO representative, up to the point where we realized that we really cannot make any more progress until that UTO representative, taught us how, or at least uploaded the source code. And so transitioning that away from her was very important. And that's another thing that we should have done from the get-go, not only understanding AWS, but transitioning it from the UTO representative to our sponsor. And The reason that's so important is because we spent a couple of sprints where we were very dependent. Our sprint was very dependent on the progress of this UTO representative. However, her schedule and our schedule didn't align necessarily. And so that meant that some deadlines got pushed, some deadlines got pulled up. Deadlines were all over the place. Deadlines were really not set. Um, and so now we were able to get this deliverable out on our schedule. And then we would have gotten our training for AWS as well. During that brief period before our sprints were inactive, we would have caught up on AWS if we had known that we had to understand it so much. And then we would have been much better prepared.